He slammed the door, saying he'd spend the weekend with his ex and I could go to hell. My daughter-in-law applauded her father-in-law, mocking my emotional dependence. I stayed calm and accessed the banking app. Within 30 seconds, everything Richard Collins thought he owned would belong to the past.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
The door frame shook when he slammed it. 38 years of marriage. And Richard had never learned how to close a door quietly. He did everything loudly. Laughed loudly, complained loudly, cheated loudly enough that even the neighbors knew about Pamela Davidson before I did. "Finally," Ashley said from the couch, not bothering to look up from her phone. "I thought he'd never leave. You know, Brenda, if you weren't so emotionally dependent on him, this wouldn't hurt so much." My daughter-in-law was 34 years old, had never worked a day in her life, and received a $5,000 monthly allowance from my bank account. She was sitting on a couch I had paid for, in a house I had paid for, wearing clothes I had paid for, telling me about emotional dependence. "You should really see someone about that," she continued, her manicured nails tapping against the screen. "Your attachment issues are exhausting. Richard deserves to have some fun. Pamela makes him happy. Why can't you just accept that?" I looked at my daughter-in-law. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in the 8 years she'd been married to my son Gregory. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, maintained and polished and utterly hollow inside. Her influencer career consisted of posting photos of luxury items she didn't pay for to followers who didn't care. "You're right," I said. Ashley's head snapped up. "I'm sorry. What?" "You're right. I've been emotionally dependent. I've been holding on to something that doesn't exist." I pulled my phone from my pocket, the same phone I'd used for 30 years of medical practice, the same phone that was connected to every bank account the Collins family had ever used. It's time I did something about that. I opened the banking app. Ashley went back to her phone, assuming I was about to do something pathetic like check our joint account balance or transfer money for Richard's weekend getaway. She had no idea that every account in Richard's name was actually in my name, that every credit card he carried was an authorized user card on my accounts, that the house, the cars, the investments, the retirement funds, all of it belonged to Dr. Brenda Collins, who had spent 40 years as a cardiologist while her husband spent 40 years spending her money. The app loaded. I navigated to account settings. I selected all linked accounts, all authorized users, all credit cards, freeze all assets. Reason: suspected misuse. Confirm? I pressed confirm. The whole process took 23 seconds. In 23 seconds, Richard Collins went from a man with access to $4.2 million in assets to a man with nothing but the $47 in his wallet and a maxed-out credit card that would be declined the moment he tried to use it. "What are you doing?" Ashley asked, finally noticing that I was still standing in the middle of the living room. "Setting a boundary." "A boundary." She laughed, the same condescending laugh she used whenever I tried to assert myself. "That's cute. You know Richard's just going to come home on Sunday and everything will go back to normal. It always does. Not this time." I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. A good wine, from the cellar I had stocked over decades. Richard preferred beer, cheap beer that he drank in front of the television while I worked 14-hour shifts keeping hearts beating. He'd never appreciated good wine. He'd never appreciated anything I'd given him. Ashley followed me, her curiosity finally overcoming her contempt. "What did you do?" "I froze the accounts." "You froze? What accounts?" "All of them. Every bank account, every credit card, every investment account, everything Richard thinks is his." The color drained from Ashley's face. I watched it happen in real time, the realization spreading like ice water through her perfectly moisturized skin. "You can't do that. Richard's name is on those accounts. Richard's name is on those accounts as an authorized user. My name is on those accounts as the account holder. There's a significant legal difference. But my allowance comes from those accounts, yes, which are now frozen." Ashley's phone slipped from her manicured fingers and clattered on the marble counter. The marble counter I had paid for when we renovated the kitchen 3 years ago, while Richard was on a golf trip with Pamela in Scottsdale. "You can't do this," she said, her voice rising to the pitch she used when she wasn't getting what she wanted. "I have bills. I have credit cards. I have things you can't afford without my money?" "Yes, I'm aware." I took a sip of wine and watched my daughter-in-law process the end of her lifestyle. She was doing the math now, calculating how long she could survive on whatever cash she had in her wallet, whatever balance remained on cards that weren't linked to my accounts. The answer, I suspected, was not very long. "Gregory will never forgive you for this." "Gregory doesn't know yet, but he will. I'm calling him right now." "Please do. I'd love for my son to hear about this from his wife before he hears it from me. I'm sure your version of events will be very illuminating." Ashley grabbed her phone from the counter and stormed out of the kitchen. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard the slam of the guest bedroom door, heard the muffled sounds of a very agitated phone call. Gregory would be confused. Gregory was always confused. He'd spent his entire adult life being manipulated by his father and his wife, never quite understanding why his mother seemed so tired, so distant, so unwilling to fight back. Tonight, he would understand. Tonight, everything would change. I finished my wine and poured another glass. Outside, the Denver sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Richard had never bothered to notice. He was probably halfway to Pamela's house by now, dreaming of a weekend of adultery funded by his wife's credit cards. He was in for a surprise. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the format. The bank's automated alert system. "Card declined at Shell Station, 1847 Broadway. Transaction, $50.47. Reason, account frozen by account holder." Richard had stopped for gas. Richard had tried to pay with my card. Richard was standing at a gas pump right now, probably screaming at the attendant, demanding to know why his card wasn't working. I smiled and took another sip of wine. The next alert came 12 minutes later. "Card declined at the Capitol Grill, 1450 Larimer Street. Transaction, $127. Reason, account frozen by account holder." The Capitol Grill. Richard's favorite restaurant, the one where he always took Pamela for their anniversary dinners. The anniversary of what? I'd never known. Their affair had been going on so long it might as well have its own calendar. I imagined Richard at the host stand, his card declining, his face reddening with embarrassment. I imagined Pamela beside him, watching her weekend plans collapse in real time. I imagined the other diners glancing over, wondering what kind of man couldn't pay for his own dinner. The third alert came 23 minutes after that. "Card declined at the Capitol Grill, 1450 Larimer Street. Transaction, $847.32. Reason, account frozen by account holder." $847.32. They'd ordered dinner anyway, probably assuming the first decline was a glitch. They'd eaten their steaks and their lobster and their expensive wine, and then the bill had come, and Richard had tried to pay, and the card had been declined again. I could picture it perfectly. The waiter, professionally uncomfortable. Pamela, suddenly interested in her phone. Richard, sweating through his designer shirt, patting his pockets for cash he didn't have, trying credit card after credit card, watching each one fail. I hoped they'd cut the card. Some restaurants still did that. A ceremonial destruction of a piece of plastic that represented someone's entire financial identity. I hoped Richard had watched the scissors slice through the card I'd given him, the card that said Richard Collins, but belonged to Brenda Collins, MD. My phone rang. Richard's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again, and again. 4 calls in 2 minutes, each one more desperate than the last. Then a text. "What did you do?" I didn't respond. Another text. "I'm stuck at a restaurant. My cards aren't working." "This isn't funny, Brenda." I took a photo of my wine glass, the sunset visible through the kitchen window behind it. I sent it to Richard with no caption. The phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Hello, Richard. What the hell did you do? My cards are frozen. All of them. I'm standing outside a restaurant like a goddamn criminal because I couldn't pay the bill. Pamela had to cover it. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Pamela paid? How generous of her. Brenda, I swear to God, you told me to go to hell, Richard. You slammed the door in my face. Your daughter-in-law applauded and called me emotionally dependent. I kept my voice calm, steady, the same voice I'd used to tell patients they needed bypass surgery. I decided to take your advice. I went to hell, and I took your money with me. Silence on the other end. I could hear traffic, the sounds of downtown Denver on a Friday night. Richard was standing on a street corner somewhere, his girlfriend beside him, his weekend ruined. You can't do this, he said finally. That money is ours. We're married. That money is mine. I earned it. Every dollar, every investment, every asset in your name came from my salary. You haven't worked since 1994, Richard. You haven't contributed anything to this marriage except disappointment. I'll call the bank. I'll have them unfreeze everything. Try it. The accounts are in my name. You're an authorized user, and I've removed your authorization. The bank will tell you exactly what I'm telling you. You have no legal claim to any of it. More silence. I heard Pamela's voice in the background, asking what was happening, asking if everything was okay. Nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay for Richard Collins again. We need to talk about this, Richard said. I'm coming home. No, you're not. You told me you were spending the weekend with Pamela. I suggest you do that. I'm sure she won't mind covering your expenses since you can't cover your own. Brenda. Good night, Richard. I hung up and blocked his number. Then I blocked Pamela's number, which I'd had for 3 years, ever since I first discovered the affair and chose to do nothing about it. Then I blocked Ashley's number, because I could hear her screaming upstairs and I didn't want to deal with whatever crisis she was manufacturing. The house was quiet now, quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. Without Richard's television blaring or Ashley's FaceTime calls or the constant low-level tension of living with people who despised me. I poured a third glass of wine and walked out to the back patio. The mountains were dark silhouettes now, the sky fading from pink to purple to black. Somewhere in Denver, Richard was trying to figure out how to survive a weekend without access to my money. Somewhere upstairs, Ashley was realizing that her lifestyle had just evaporated. And somewhere in my chest, in the place where I'd carried 38 years of disappointment and betrayal, something was finally starting to heal. Tomorrow would bring confrontations. Richard would find a way home. Ashley would involve Gregory. There would be screaming and accusations and threats. But tonight, I was going to sit on my patio, drink my wine, and watch the stars come out over the mountains I had paid for the privilege of seeing. They could all go to hell. I was already there, and it felt like heaven. The first time Richard told me I was too much, I was 32 years old and 6 months pregnant with Gregory. I'd just been offered a position as head of cardiology at Denver General, the youngest person ever considered for the role. I came home excited, ready to celebrate, ready to plan our future around this opportunity. Richard was watching football. "That's great, babe," he said without looking up from the screen. "But you know that's going to mean more hours, right? More stress. You're already too much as it is. Always working, always striving. Maybe you should think about what's really important." I didn't take the position. I told myself it was because of the pregnancy, because of the baby coming, because Richard was right about needing to focus on what mattered. I told myself a lot of things in those early years. I became very good at lying to myself. The pattern established itself quickly. Every time I succeeded, Richard found a way to diminish it. Every time I celebrated, he reminded me of what I was sacrificing. Every time I pushed forward, he pulled me back with guilt, with doubt, with the constant refrain that I was too much, too ambitious, too focused on work, too unavailable for him, too intense about everything, too difficult to live with. I wrote it all down back then, not because I recognized what was happening, but because I'd been trained to document. Medical school teaches you to keep records. Every symptom, every treatment, every outcome. I kept a diary of my marriage the same way I kept notes on my patients, meticulously detailed, chronologically organized, completely blind to the diagnosis staring me in the face. I found that diary 2 weeks ago. buried in a box of old journals in the attic. I'd been looking for something else entirely, financial records from our early years that might help with the divorce proceedings I was secretly planning. Instead, I found 40 years of evidence. 1986. Richard says I work too much. He's probably right. I should be home more. 1989. Richard forgot our anniversary again. He says I make too big a deal of these things. 1992. Richard lost another job. He says it's because his boss was intimidated by him. I believe him. 1995. Richard says I should stop practicing medicine and stay home with Gregory. He says working mothers damage their children. I tried to explain that we need my income, but he got angry. 1998. Richard went on a golf trip with his clients. I found a receipt for jewelry I never received. When I asked about it, he said I was being paranoid. Maybe I am. Page after page after page. 40 years of a man systematically dismantling my confidence, my self-worth, my ability to trust my own perceptions. Gaslighting, Dr. Helen Morris called it. When I finally showed her the diaries last month. Textbook psychological abuse, sustained over decades, designed to keep me dependent and compliant. The remarkable thing, Helen said, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she turned the pages, is that you kept practicing medicine through all of this. You maintained a successful career while being told every day that you were failing at everything that mattered. I compartmentalized. Work was the one place where I felt competent. At home, I was always wrong, always too much or not enough. But at the hospital, I knew what I was doing. And Richard never worked after Gregory was born? He had jobs. None of them lasted more than a year or two. He always had an excuse. The boss was unfair. The company was mismanaged. The economy was bad. I never questioned it. I just kept working, kept paying the bills, kept supporting his lifestyle. While he told you that you were too focused on your career. While he told me I was too focused on my career. I heard the absurdity of it out loud. The decades of contradiction I'd somehow never noticed. He made me feel guilty for working, while he spent every dollar I earned. Helen closed the diary. Brenda, what changed? Why are you seeing this now, after all these years? I thought about the question. The real answer was complicated, layered with years of small realizations that had finally accumulated into something I couldn't ignore. Ashley, I said, my daughter-in-law. She's like a mirror held up to Richard. Everything he does, she does louder. The manipulation, the contempt, the entitlement. Watching her treat Gregory the same way Richard treats me, it's like seeing the pattern from the outside for the first time. And Gregory doesn't see it? Gregory learned from his father. He thinks this is how relationships work. He thinks a wife's job is to support her husband's ego, no matter the cost. But you're not willing to pay that cost anymore. Not anymore. The discovery of Pamela had been the final piece. I'd suspected for years, of course. The late nights, the weekend trips, the mysterious charges on credit cards he thought I didn't check. But I'd never had proof, never had something concrete I could point to and say, this is real, this happened, I'm not paranoid. 3 months ago, I found it. An email Richard had forgotten to delete, forwarded to himself from Pamela's account, travel itineraries for a trip to Cabo San Lucas they'd taken last March, while I was attending a cardiology conference in Chicago. The hotel was the same one Richard and I had stayed at for our 20th anniversary, the one he'd said was too expensive for us to visit again. He'd taken his mistress to our anniversary hotel. He'd paid for it with my credit card. I sat in my home office that night and read through 20 years of emails between Richard and Pamela. 20 years. They'd been having an affair since before Gregory graduated high school. They'd been planning a future together while I worked 16-hour days to pay for Richard's comfortable life. The emails were devastating, not because of the betrayal, though that was painful enough, but because of how Richard talked about me. Brenda's working late again. She's so obsessed with her career she doesn't even notice I'm gone. Brenda asked about the credit card charges. I told her she was being paranoid. She believed me, like always. Brenda's talking about retirement. I need to make sure everything is in my name before she gets any ideas about leaving. That last email was from 6 months ago. Richard had been planning to take everything. He'd been consulting with a divorce attorney, exploring ways to claim half of assets I had earned entirely on my own. He was going to leave me with nothing after I'd given him everything. The final email was the one that sealed my decision. Once Brenda retires, I'll have her declared mentally incompetent. She's been showing signs of instability for years. Everyone knows how emotional she is. I'll get power of attorney, transfer everything to my name, and then file for divorce. She'll be too confused to fight it. By the time she figures out what happened, I'll be in Cabo with you. Mentally incompetent. Power of attorney. The man I'd been married to for 38 years was planning to have me declared insane so he could steal my money. I showed the emails to Helen. She read them twice, her face growing paler with each pass. Brenda, this is criminal. This is fraud, financial abuse, elder abuse. You need to go to the police. I need to be smarter than that. If I go to the police now, Richard will know I've found the emails. He'll delete everything, hide assets, get his story straight. I need to cut off his resources first. Make sure he can't hire lawyers, can't hide money, can't do anything except watch his plans fall apart. That's why you came to me? To make sure you're thinking clearly before you act. I came to you because I spent 40 years believing I was crazy. I need someone I trust to tell me I'm not. I need to know that what I'm seeing is real, that the patterns I'm finally recognizing are actually there. Helen took my hand. We'd known each other for 20 years, colleagues who'd become friends, who'd supported each other through the particular challenges of being women in medicine. You're not crazy, Brenda. You've been abused. Systematically, deliberately, for your entire marriage. The fact that you're still standing, still successful, still capable of seeing the truth after all this time is remarkable. So I should do it? I should freeze the accounts? I think you should do whatever you need to do to protect yourself. And I think you should document everything, just like you've always done. When this goes to court, and it will go to court, you'll want every piece of evidence you can get. That was 2 weeks ago. I'd spent the time since then preparing. Consulting with Christina Barnes, a divorce attorney Helen recommended, gathering financial records, photographing documents, creating backups of everything. Building a case so airtight that Richard wouldn't be able to wriggle out of it, and waiting for the right moment to act. The moment came tonight, when Richard slammed that door, when he told me to go to hell, when Ashley applauded his cruelty and mocked my emotional dependence. They thought I was weak. They thought 40 years of manipulation had broken me completely, had turned me into someone who would accept anything, forgive anything, fund anything just to keep the peace. They were wrong. The woman they thought they knew, the compliant wife, the endlessly giving mother-in-law, the emotionally dependent victim, she had never really existed. She was a role I'd played to survive. A mask I'd worn while I worked and saved and quietly built a fortune that was entirely, legally, irrevocably mine. The real Brenda Collins was the one who had just frozen $4.2 million in assets with a single tap on her phone. The real Brenda Collins was the one drinking wine on her patio while her husband panicked on a street corner in downtown Denver. The real Brenda Collins was just getting started. Gregory called me 17 times on Saturday morning. I let every call go to voicemail. Ashley had clearly gotten to him first, and I could imagine the version of events she was spinning. Crazy mother-in-law, financial abuse, elderly woman losing her mind. She'd probably already posted something on Instagram, some cryptic story about family drama designed to generate sympathy without providing details. The voicemail started angry and got angrier. Mom, what the hell is going on? Ashley says you froze all the accounts. She can't access her money. Dad's stranded somewhere. Call me back. Mom, this isn't funny. Ashley's credit cards aren't working. She has bills due. The kids need things. You can't just cut everyone off. I'm coming over. We need to talk about this. You can't just decide to blow up our family because you're upset about Dad taking a trip. The last message was from 11 a.m., just before he showed up at my door. Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this ends now. I'm on my way. I was ready for him. I'd spent the morning organizing documents, printing emails, preparing the evidence I would need to make Gregory understand. My son was a good man underneath the layers of conditioning his father and wife had wrapped around him. He just needed to see the truth. The doorbell rang at 11:47. I opened it to find Gregory on the porch, his face red with frustration, Ashley standing behind him with her arms crossed. She'd dressed for the occasion, I noticed. Expensive athleisure, perfect makeup, the costume of a victim who wanted to look sympathetic without trying too hard. "Mom." Gregory pushed past me into the foyer. "We need to talk." "Hello, Gregory." "Ashley, please, come in." "Don't, please come in me." "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Ashley's accounts are frozen. Her credit cards are declining. She couldn't pay for the kids' soccer registration this morning. "Those accounts are in my name, Gregory." Ashley was an authorized user. I removed her authorization. "You can't just do that." "Actually, I can. Legally, financially, I can do exactly that. Everything Ashley has been spending for the past 8 years has come from accounts I own and control." Ashley stepped forward, her voice dripping with practiced concern. "Brenda, we're worried about you. This isn't like you at all. Making rash decisions, cutting off family, isolating yourself. Gregory thinks maybe you should see someone. I have been seeing someone. Helen Morris. She's a psychiatrist at Denver General, a colleague of mine for 20 years. She's been helping me understand some patterns in my life that I'd been blind to." "What kind of patterns?" Gregory asked. "Why don't you both sit down? There are some things I need to show you." I led them to the dining room, where I'd arranged the evidence in neat stacks on the table. 40 years of diary entries, 20 years of emails, 5 years of financial records showing transfers to Pamela's accounts, the trip to Cabo, the divorce attorney consultations, the plan to have me declared incompetent. "What is all this?" Gregory asked, eyeing the papers with suspicion. "This is your father's affair with Pamela Davidson. It's been going on for 20 years. Mom, don't be ridiculous. Dad and Pamela are just friends. Friends who travel together to resort hotels while I'm at medical conferences. Friends who exchange emails planning their future together. Friends who discuss how to steal my money after having me declared mentally unfit." I pushed the emails across the table. Gregory picked them up reluctantly, his eyes scanning the pages. I watched his expression change as he read, watched the certainty drain from his face. This could be fake. Anyone could have written these. The email addresses are verified. The travel itineraries match credit card charges on accounts I have records of. Your father's divorce attorney confirms the consultations in his billing records. Dad was consulting a divorce attorney? For 6 months. He was planning to leave me, Gregory. But not before he transferred all the assets to his name and had me declared incompetent to manage my own affairs. Ashley laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "This is insane. Richard would never do something like that. You're paranoid, Brenda. You've always been paranoid." "Have I?" I pulled out another stack of papers. "These are text messages between you and Richard, Ashley. Messages where you discuss my emotional instability. Messages where you plan how to isolate me from Gregory. Messages where you joke about how much easier things will be when the old woman finally dies." Ashley's face went white. Gregory turned to look at her, the emails still clutched in his hand. "What is she talking about?" "I don't know what those are. She's making things up. She's lost her mind, Gregory. Just like Richard said she would." I slid the text message printouts across the table. Gregory picked them up. The silence stretched as he read, as he saw his wife's words in black and white. "When the old woman finally dies, we'll inherit everything. All we have to do is wait her out. Richard says she's getting worse. More emotional, more unstable. Another year or two and we can have her committed. LOL, can you imagine Brenda in a nursing home? She'd probably try to diagnose all the other patients. You don't have dementia, you have atrial fibrillation." Gregory set down the papers. His hands were shaking. "Ashley, what is this? It's taken out of context. We were joking. Your father and I were just venting about how difficult she can be. You were planning to have my mother committed. You were planning to take her money. That's not what— Gregory, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly." Gregory stood, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I understand that my wife and my father have been conspiring against my mother. I understand that everything you've told me about her being too emotional and unstable was part of a plan to steal from her. Gregory, please, don't. He held up his hand, cutting her off. Don't say another word. He turned to me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in my son's eyes in years. Clarity. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I believed them when they said you were having problems. I believed Ashley when she said we needed to be patient with you. I never thought... You never thought your wife and your father could be capable of this. I understand. I didn't want to believe it either. What do I do now? That's up to you, Gregory. I've already frozen the accounts. Your father can't access any of the money he was planning to steal. Ashley's allowance is gone. The plan they had, it's over. She's been spending your money this whole time. $5,000 a month for 8 years. That's almost $500,000. I know. And she was planning to take more. To have you locked away so she could take everything. That was the plan, yes. Gregory looked at his wife. Ashley was crying now. Real tears or performance tears, I couldn't tell. She'd always been good at crying on cue, at making herself look fragile and victimized. It had worked on Gregory for 8 years. I wondered if it would work now. The kids, Ashley said, her voice breaking. Think about the kids, Gregory. We can't destroy our family over some misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding. You were planning to steal from my mother. You were planning to have her committed. I was just going along with what Richard said. He's the one who came up with the plan. I was trying to protect our family by destroying mine. The conversation went in circles for another hour. Ashley alternated between crying and attacking, denying and justifying, pleading and threatening. Gregory sat mostly silent, occasionally asking questions, his face growing harder with each of Ashley's evasions. I watched my son wake up. It was painful to see. The way understanding dawned in his eyes. The way he realized he'd been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had. He'd spent his whole life in his father's shadow, learning from Richard how to treat women, how to dismiss concerns, how to prioritize comfort over truth. Now he was seeing his father clearly for the first time, seeing his wife clearly, seeing himself clearly. I need to leave, Ashley said finally, standing abruptly. I can't stay here and listen to this anymore. You're both crazy. The whole family is crazy. Where are you going to go? Gregory asked. Your credit cards don't work. Your bank account is empty. You can't even pay for an Uber. I have friends. I have family. I don't need you people. She stormed out, slamming the door the same way Richard had slammed it the night before. Like father-in-law, like daughter-in-law. They'd learned from each other, encouraged each other, built a partnership of exploitation that had lasted 8 years. Gregory and I sat in silence after she left. The evidence was still spread across the table, 40 years of manipulation laid out in paper and ink. I'm sorry, Mom, he said finally. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. You were a victim too, Gregory. Children learn what their parents teach them. Your father taught you that women exist to serve men. It's not your fault that you believed him. It's my fault that I didn't question it, that I let Ashley treat you this way, that I chose her side every single time. You can choose differently now. He looked at the papers, at the text messages, at the emails that proved everything he'd believed was a lie. What happens next? Next, I file for divorce. Next, your father learns that everything he thought he owned belongs to me. Next, Ashley learns that her lifestyle was always borrowed, never earned. And me? What happens to me? I reached across the table and took my son's hand. 36 years old, and he was still the little boy who'd fallen off his bicycle and come running to me for comfort. You figure out who you want to be, not your father's son, not Ashley's husband, just you, and I'll be here, whatever you decide. He squeezed my hand, the first genuine affection I'd felt from him in years. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. I always have. Richard came home Sunday evening. He didn't have a choice. Pamela had covered the restaurant bill on Friday night, but she'd made it clear that her generosity had limits. A woman who'd been waiting 20 years to become the next Mrs. Collins wasn't going to fund a weekend of humiliation. I heard his car pull into the driveway at 6:47 p.m. I was sitting in the living room, the documents still spread across the coffee table, a fresh glass of wine in my hand. I'd been expecting him for hours, had prepared for this confrontation the way I used to prepare for surgery, every instrument in place, every contingency planned for. The front door opened. Richard stood in the entryway, looking smaller than I remembered. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed. The polished veneer I'd financed for 38 years cracked and peeling. Brenda. His voice was careful, the tone he used when he was trying to manipulate me. We need to talk about what happened. Sit down, Richard. He hesitated, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the documents on the table, the controlled expression on my face. Something in my voice must have told him that the rules had changed, that the submissive wife he'd counted on for 4 decades was no longer in residence. He sat. "Where were you last night?" I asked. "At a hotel, downtown. Pamela wouldn't. She said I needed to sort this out with you before she could help anymore." "Pamela said that? How interesting. I would have thought your girlfriend of 20 years would be more supportive in a crisis." Richard's face tightened. "You know about Pamela." "I've known for 3 months. I found the emails, Richard. 20 years of emails. The trips, the hotels, the jewelry you bought her with my money, the plans you made for your future together. Brenda, I can explain. You can't explain. You can justify. You can excuse. You can spin elaborate stories about how I drove you into another woman's arms with my working and my success and my being too much. But you can't explain, because there is no explanation that makes any of this acceptable." I picked up the printout of the email I'd read 100 times since discovering it, the one that had finally broken through my decades of denial. "Once Brenda retires, I'll have her declared mentally incompetent," I read aloud. "She's been showing signs of instability for years. I'll get power of attorney, transfer everything to my name, and then file for divorce. She'll be too confused to fight it." Richard's face went gray. He reached for the paper, but I pulled it back. "That's not, you're taking it out of context. What context makes planning to steal your wife's money and have her committed to an institution acceptable? I wasn't going to actually do it. It was just, I was frustrated. Pamela and I were talking about possibilities, about how things might work out. It was a fantasy, not a plan. You consulted a divorce attorney. For information, just to understand my options. You had Ashley help you. You coordinated with her to make me look unstable, to isolate me from Gregory, to build a case for my incompetence. Ashley exaggerates. You know how she is. I mentioned some concerns about your mental state, and she ran with it. I never told her to text you that when the old woman finally dies, we'll inherit everything, to joke about having me committed, to systematically turn my son against me." Richard was sweating now. The same nervous perspiration I'd seen from patients facing the consequences of years of poor health choices. "I didn't know she was saying those things. She's unstable. She's the one you should be angry at, not me. I'm angry at both of you. I'm angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. But mostly, Richard, I'm disappointed. 42 years we've been together. 42 years I worked and earned and built something. And you spent every one of those years planning how to take it from me. That's not fair. I supported you. I raised Gregory while you were at the hospital. I ran the household, managed the social calendar, made sure you could focus on your career. You played golf. You had lunches with friends. You took trips with your mistress. The household was managed by housekeepers I hired and paid for. Gregory was raised by nannies I hired and paid for. Your contribution to this marriage was spending my money and making me feel guilty about earning it. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. For the first time in 42 years, I'm being completely honest with you, and you can't handle it because you've spent so long believing your own lies." I set down the email and picked up the stack of financial documents. Bank statements, investment records, property deeds. "Let me tell you what's going to happen now, Richard. I've consulted with a divorce attorney, Christina Barnes, one of the best in Colorado. She's reviewed all of our financial records, and she's confirmed what I already knew. Everything we have is legally mine." "That's impossible. We're married. Community property?" Colorado is an equitable distribution state. not a community property state. And even if it were, equitable distribution considers the source of assets, the contribution of each spouse, the economic circumstances of each party. I earned every dollar. You spent every dollar. A court will recognize that. I'll fight it. I'll hire my own attorney. With what money? Your credit cards don't work. Your bank accounts are frozen. The attorney you were already consulting has dropped you as a client because you can't pay your bill. I have friends. I have family. People who will help me. Pamela won't help you. Ashley can't help you. Your golf buddies at the country club, the ones you've been impressing with your lifestyle for decades, do you think they'll loan money to a man whose wife just exposed him as a fraud? Richard's face crumpled. It was strange to watch. The collapse of a man who had always seemed so confident, so in control. He'd built his entire identity on the illusion of success, on the assumption that I would always be there to fund his image. What do you want? He asked finally. What will it take to make this go away? Nothing can make this go away, Richard. You spent 20 years cheating on me. You spent 6 months planning to have me committed. You spent 42 years treating me like an ATM with a medical degree. There's no making that go away. Then what happens now? Now, you sign the divorce papers Christina has prepared. You agree to a settlement that gives you nothing, because you deserve nothing. You move out of this house, which is in my name, and you find somewhere else to live. I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem anymore. Brenda, please. After everything we've been through together, everything we've been through, do you mean the years I worked while you played? The holidays you spent with Pamela while I covered for you with Gregory? The therapy bills I paid because I couldn't understand why I was so unhappy in my perfect marriage? I stood, looking down at the man I'd been married to for 4 decades. He looked small from this angle, diminished, a shadow of the confident manipulator who'd controlled my life for so long. You had every advantage, Richard. A wife who earned well, who was too busy to notice your affairs, who believed you when you told her she was the problem. You could have had a comfortable life, a genuinely comfortable life if you'd just been honest, if you'd just been faithful, if you'd just treated me like a human being instead of a resource to be exploited. I loved you. In my own way, I loved you. Your way of loving involved lying to me, stealing from me, and planning to have me declared insane. That's not love, Richard. That's parasitism. I walked to the front door and opened it. Christina will have the papers delivered tomorrow. You have 72 hours to sign and vacate the premises. If you're not out by Wednesday, I'll have you removed by the police. You can't do this. This is my home. This is my home. It's always been my home. You just lived here. Richard stood slowly, like a man rising from a hospital bed after major surgery. He walked to the door, pausing at the threshold to look back at me one last time. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I know. You never thought about me at all. That was the problem. He stepped outside. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, listening to his footsteps fade down the driveway, the sound of a car engine starting, then pulling away, then disappearing into the distance. He was gone. After 42 years, after everything he'd done and everything he'd planned to do, Richard Collins was finally, completely gone. I walked back to the living room, gathered the documents from the coffee table, and put them away in the filing cabinet I'd bought specifically for this purpose. The evidence was preserved, organized, ready for whatever legal battles might come. But something told me there wouldn't be many battles. Richard was beaten. He had no money, no allies, no credibility. The man who'd spent his whole life exploiting others had finally run out of victims. I poured myself another glass of wine and sat down to watch the sunset. The same sunset I'd watched on Friday night, when this had all begun. The same mountains, the same sky, the same stars beginning to emerge as the light faded. Everything was the same, and nothing was the same at all. For the first time in 42 years, I was alone. Not lonely, not abandoned, just alone. Alone with my thoughts, my achievements, my future. Alone with the woman I'd been before I met Richard Collins, the woman I'd lost somewhere in the decades of manipulation and self-doubt. She was still there. I could feel her stirring, waking up after a long sleep. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Ashley's accusations, Gregory's questions, the legal process that would formally end my marriage. But tonight, I was just going to sit with my wine and watch the stars come out. Tonight, I was going to practice being myself. The divorce papers arrived at Richard's hotel on Tuesday morning. Christina had timed the delivery for maximum impact, catching Richard in the lobby as he was leaving for what he'd told the front desk was a business meeting. The meeting, I later learned from Gregory, was actually an attempt to borrow money from an old college friend who'd made his fortune in real estate. The friend declined. Word had gotten out about the frozen accounts, about Pamela, about the spectacular implosion of Richard Collins's carefully constructed life. The country club crowd Richard had entertained for decades was suddenly very busy, their calendars mysteriously full whenever he called. Richard signed the papers on Wednesday. He didn't have a choice. Christina had made it clear that fighting would be expensive, futile, and public. A contested divorce would mean depositions, discovery, the full exposure of Richard's affair and his plans to have me committed. The emails would become court records. The text messages would be entered as evidence. Every ugly detail would be available for anyone to see. Richard chose the quiet humiliation over the loud one. He signed away any claim to the assets he'd spent 42 years spending, agreed to vacate the house by Friday, and accepted a settlement that gave him nothing but his personal belongings and the clothes on his back. "It's done," Christina said, calling me on Wednesday afternoon. "He signed everything. The divorce will be finalized in 60 days. How did he look?" "Defeated. He tried to negotiate for a small monthly allowance, said he couldn't survive without some income. I told him that wasn't your problem." "Did he mention Pamela?" "He asked if he could have access to the Cabo timeshare. Apparently, he had plans to take her there this month. I told him the timeshare was in your name and he could book his own vacation." I laughed, the first real laugh I'd experienced in longer than I could remember. The man who'd planned to steal my fortune couldn't even afford a weekend getaway. Gregory came over that evening. He'd been staying with a friend since the confrontation on Saturday, taking time to process everything he'd learned. Ashley had gone to her sister's house in Phoenix, making vague threats about custody battles and restraining orders that her sister's lawyer had quickly dismissed as fantasies. "Dad's at a Motel 6 off I-25, Gregory said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "He called me this morning, asked if he could stay with us. I said no." "How did that feel?" "Terrible, and also necessary. He's still lying, Mom. Even now, even after everything came out, he's still trying to spin it. He told me the emails were taken out of context, that you manipulated the evidence, that you've been planning this for years. And you believed him?" I wanted to believe him. Part of me still wants to believe him, because believing him would mean my childhood made sense. It would mean the man who raised me was someone worth respecting. But you didn't believe him. I couldn't. I read the emails. I read the text messages. I talked to Ashley's sister, who told me Ashley has been complaining about the old woman for years. Everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. I poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Gregory. He took it, stared into the liquid like it might contain answers. "I filed for divorce too," he said. "From Ashley. Are you sure that's what you want? I'm sure I can't trust her. I'm sure she was using me to get access to you. I'm sure that every time she defended my father or criticized you, she was playing a part in a scheme to steal from my own mother." "What about the children?" "I'm asking for joint custody. Ashley will fight it, but her lawyer has already advised her that the text messages make her look bad. A judge isn't going to favor a mother who joked about having her mother-in-law committed. I'm sorry, Gregory. I never wanted this to affect the kids. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." He set down his wine and looked at me with eyes that seemed clearer than I'd ever seen them. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you survive it? 40 years of Dad treating you like that, convincing you that you were the problem. How did you keep going?" I thought about the question. It was the same question Helen had asked me. The same question I'd been asking myself since I finally saw the truth. "I didn't know," I said. That's the honest answer. I didn't know I was being abused. I thought this was just what marriage was like. I thought the problem was me, that if I just worked harder, loved better, gave more, everything would be okay. But everything was never okay. Everything was never okay. But I couldn't see it, because I was inside it. You can't see the shape of a prison when you're living in the cell. What changed? What made you finally see? Ashley. Watching her treat you the same way Richard treated me. Watching the patterns repeat in the next generation. I couldn't save myself for 40 years. But the moment I saw my son being manipulated the same way, something broke through. Gregory was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I've been a terrible son. You've been a manipulated son. There's a difference. I chose Ashley over you. Every time. Every argument. Every conflict. Every moment when I had to pick a side. I picked her. Because your father taught you that's what men do. They side with their wives against their mothers. They prioritize the new family over the old. He was teaching you to betray me the same way he betrayed me. I should have known better. How? Richard was your model for what a husband looked like. He was your guide for how to treat women. You learned from him, just like he learned from his father. The cycle would have continued forever if we hadn't broken it. We broke it. We broke it. You and me, together. The moment you chose to believe the evidence over the lies, the moment you chose your mother over your wife's manipulation, you broke a chain that's been constraining our family for generations. Gregory set down his wine and stood. He walked around the table and hugged me. Really hugged me. The way he used to when he was small and the world was confusing and I was the only person who could make it make sense. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I know, sweetheart. I forgive you. Can we start over? Can we build something new? That's exactly what I want. A new relationship, based on honesty and respect. Not the one your father taught you to have, but the one I should have taught you to expect." We talked for hours that night. About the divorce, about custody arrangements, about the practical matters of dismantling two marriages simultaneously. But we also talked about the past, about Gregory's childhood, about the moments when he'd sensed something was wrong but couldn't name it. We talked about Ashley, about what he'd thought he loved and what he'd actually been accepting. We talked about the future, about what kind of man he wanted to become now that he was free to choose. Around midnight, Gregory went home to his friend's apartment. He'd start looking for his own place tomorrow, somewhere he could build a new life without Ashley's influence. The custody negotiations would be difficult, but Christina had agreed to help, to coordinate the two divorces so they supported each other. I walked out to the back patio and stood under the stars, the same stars I'd been watching for 3 nights now, the same mountains, the same wine. But everything was different. Richard was gone. Ashley was gone. The web of manipulation that had constrained my family for decades was unraveling, thread by thread. And my son was back. Not the Gregory who'd been trained to dismiss me, but a new Gregory, one who was learning to see clearly for the first time. I raised my glass to the mountain silhouette. "To new beginnings," I said to no one. The stars didn't answer, but I didn't need them to. I knew what I was starting. I knew what I was leaving behind. And for the first time in 42 years, I knew exactly who I was. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in October, 63 days after I froze the accounts. Richard didn't appear at the final hearing. He'd signed everything by proxy, too proud or too broken to sit across from me in a courtroom and admit that his 42-year strategy had failed completely. I sat in the courtroom anyway, Christina beside me, watching the judge review the settlement one final time. "Mrs. Collins, I have to say, this is one of the most one-sided agreements I've ever seen. Your husband is receiving nothing except personal effects. Are you certain this is what you want?" "I'm certain, Your Honor. This settlement reflects the reality of our marriage. I earned the assets. He spent them. I'm keeping what's mine." The judge nodded, signed the decree, and just like that, I was free. Free of Richard, free of the marriage, free of 42 years of gaslighting and manipulation and slow, steady erosion of everything I'd thought I was. Christina took me to lunch afterward. A celebration at a restaurant I'd never been to because Richard had always complained it was too fancy. We drank champagne and ate things I'd been told I didn't like by a man who'd never asked what I actually liked. "What will you do now?" Christina asked. "You're 64, retired, independently wealthy. The world is open." I've been thinking about that. For 40 years, I defined myself by my work. Then, for the last few years, I defined myself by my marriage, by what Richard needed, by what Ashley demanded. I don't know who I am without those things. That sounds like an opportunity. It feels like one. Terrifying and exciting in equal measure. I'd already made some decisions. The house in Denver was going on the market. Too many memories. Too many rooms where Richard's voice still echoed. I'd found a condo in Boulder, smaller but with better views, a place where I could build something new without the ghosts of the old. Gregory was settling into his own place, a modest apartment near downtown. The custody negotiations with Ashley had been brutal, but successful. He'd gotten joint custody of the kids, with a schedule that ensured Ashley couldn't isolate them the way she'd tried to isolate me. "How are the grandchildren handling everything?" Christina asked. "Better than expected. Kids are resilient. They're spending more time with Gregory now, which means they're spending more time with me." Ashley is less enthusiastic about that arrangement. Ashley had moved back to Phoenix permanently, living with her sister while she figured out her next move. Her influencer career had collapsed when the story of her text messages leaked online. Apparently, joking about having your mother-in-law committed wasn't the brand content her followers were looking for. And Richard? I don't know. I don't ask. Gregory says he's living in a studio apartment somewhere, working part-time at a car dealership. Pamela dumped him when she found out he was broke. Turns out she was only interested in the lifestyle he could provide, not the man underneath. "Karma," Christina said. "Something like that." We finished lunch and parted ways outside the restaurant. Christina had other clients, other divorces, other women finding their way out of marriages that had slowly suffocated them. I had the rest of my life to figure out. I drove home through Denver streets that looked different now, streets I'd driven for 40 years without really seeing. The mountains were sharper somehow, the sky bluer, the buildings more detailed. It was like someone had adjusted the focus on the world, bringing everything into clarity that had been blurred for decades. Gregory called that evening, wanting to know how the hearing had gone. We talked for an hour, about the divorce, about his kids, about plans for Thanksgiving. He was going to bring them to my new place in Boulder, the first holiday we'd spend together without Richard or Ashley hovering over the celebration. "I'm grateful for you, Mom," he said before hanging up. "I know I didn't say it enough before. I'm saying it now. I'm grateful for you too, sweetheart. Always have been." The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk, something I hadn't done in years, just walking with no destination, no schedule, no one waiting for me to come back and explain where I'd been. The park near my house was full of autumn leaves, reds and golds and oranges scattered across paths I'd never taken the time to notice. A woman about my age was sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons from a paper bag. "Beautiful morning," she said as I passed. "It is," I agreed, and meant it. I walked for an hour, then 2. My phone stayed silent in my pocket. No one demanding my attention, my money, my time. No one telling me I was too much or not enough. Just me and the leaves and the mountains in the distance. I found another bench and sat down, watching a father push his daughter on a swing. She was laughing, that pure, unself-conscious laughter that children have before the world teaches them to be careful with their joy. I used to laugh like that. Before Richard, before the marriage, before the decades of being told that my happiness was too loud, too much, too overwhelming for the people around me. I'd had that laughter once, and I'd let it be trained out of me, one criticism at a time. But maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe 64 wasn't too old to learn how to laugh again, how to take up space without apologizing, how to want things without justifying them. Helen had said something at our last session that stuck with me. "You spent 40 years diminishing yourself to make room for someone else's ego. Now you have all that space back. The question is, What will you fill it with? I didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time I was excited to find out. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I'd been keeping a list over the past few weeks, things I wanted to do now that I was free, places I wanted to visit, books I wanted to read, hobbies I wanted to try. The list had started small but was growing every day. Learn to paint, take a cooking class, visit the Greek islands, write a memoir, volunteer at the cardiology clinic, learn to salsa dance, get a dog, say yes more often. Some of the items were practical, some were whimsical. All of them were things Richard would have mocked, would have called too much, or a waste of time, or not practical for someone your age. Richard's opinion didn't matter anymore. His voice, which had lived in my head for 40 years, was finally growing quiet. I added one more item to the list: learn to trust myself. That was the real work ahead. Not the travel or the hobbies or the new condo in Boulder. The real work was learning to believe my own perceptions, to trust my own judgment, to know that when I felt something was wrong, I was allowed to act on that feeling. I'd spent 4 decades ignoring my instincts because Richard had taught me they couldn't be trusted. I'd learned to doubt myself so thoroughly that I hadn't recognized abuse when it was sitting across from me at the breakfast table every morning. Never again. I stood up from the bench and continued my walk. The morning had grown warmer, the sun breaking through the autumn clouds. In the distance, the mountains were purple with shadow, their peaks dusted with the first snow of the season. This was my life now. Not the life Richard had designed for me, not the life Ashley had tried to steal from me, but my own life, built on my own terms. I had money, I had health, I had a son who was learning to see clearly, and grandchildren who would know a different story about what a woman could be. Most importantly, I had time. Time I'd almost lost to a man who'd been counting the days until I was gone. He slammed the door, saying he'd spend the weekend with his ex. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would cry and beg and accept whatever scraps he threw my way. Instead, I opened a banking app. I pressed a button, and I took back everything he'd tried to steal. The account holder had frozen all assets for misuse. The account holder had cut off the allowances, the credit cards, the lifestyle that had been funded by her labor and consumed by their greed. The account holder had finally remembered that the account was hers. I walked home through the falling leaves, planning my next adventure, leaving the past behind me where it belonged.